Jonathan Swan, I want to get you on this new reporting from Jackie Carolinick, Ken Delaney, and Vaughn Hilliard and Jake Traylor, which is that Kash Patel was called to the White House after continued questions over his behavior. They write, the embattled FBI director was set to travel to Chicago in the Bureau's jet to see his girlfriend perform at a music festival when he was called in, sources tell MS. Now, there's been a lot of frustration that has been reported in your paper on MS Now about how the White House is watching Kash Patel live his life using taxpayer funds, allegedly. But when you think about, compared to the first term, right, when there was an embarrassing headline, usually that person was kind of ixnayed very quickly. Kash Patel has been able to hold on largely, according to Jackie, because of his ability to deal with 2020 and act on what Donald Trump wants when it comes to 2020. She right?
So I don't actually have any reporting on this latest incident, but what we have in the book is checks out with what you're describing, which is that particularly last summer, President Trump was complaining quite a lot about Kash Patel. And what he didn't like was he was calling him Flashy Kash. He didn't like to see him basically going to these UFC fights and flying around on the jets and just sort of embracing the lifestyle. And what Trump really wanted was to see him, quote unquote, do his job. Of course, in Trump's mind, that has a very particular meaning. And one thing that he didn't seem to grasp was that Kash Patel couldn't personally just imprison all of Trump's various enemies. So Trump was very frustrated with the Justice Department in general, with Kash Patel, with Pam Bondi. It was largely over what he saw as this slow pace of prosecutions with people like James Comey, Letitia James, go down the list of John Brennan, people that Trump wants to see behind bars. So I actually haven't got any reporting on the latest with that, but it got so bad late last year that both Maggie and I were talking to sources at a senior level of the administration who thought that it could be imminent that Trump would make a change at the top of the FBI, but obviously he hasn't. And I just don't know what the latest situation is with him.
I was going to try to ask some more forward-looking highbrow question, Maggie, but because you brought her up, can we talk about the Natalie Harper of it all? I mean, obviously, presidents across the board always find people, they have their body person or a fixer that they bring in from a past life who is able to demonstrate this extreme level of loyalty and allegiance to them and their and everything about them. But Natalie Harper has seemed to taken things to the next level, even more than someone like Hope Hicks or Michael Cohen, so to speak. Can you describe their relationship and whether Natalie is viewed as a positive force or a negative force by the people around her in the White House?
So during the campaign, and we describe this in the book, she became ever present. She would join him on the golf course when he was golfing, in the interregnum period, even before the campaign, literally sometimes running on foot behind his golf cart.
With a printer?
I think just running. But yes, she was known as the human printer because she often, in later iterations, would carry a battery-charged portable printer, and she would print out, a healthy supply of positive news that he wanted to see or she thought he would want to see. He considers her very loyal. He will say to advisors, you'll all go off and make money. We describe this in the book. She'll never leave me. But she was also a source of concern during the campaign because, among other things, she was leaving very personal notes in his private spaces, one of which said, "You are all that matters to me." Others talked about, sort of wanting to have a longer conversation throughout the day and not talk about work. The Secret Service was concerned about this. Nonetheless, as I said, he values loyalty, and he values the fact that she is willing to constantly provide, positive information. It is literally sort of the sun is always shining. There are other people like that in Trump's orbit, and we talk about this in the book, too. Boris Epstein, for instance, who, is known in Trump's world, he's Trump's top legal advisor, known as the good news guy. Trump has made clear to people that he likes having someone who will essentially say, everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be fine. in Natalie Harp's case, she's also a conduit for information. She is a way for people to bypass the official chain. She is a way to get, texts to him that people want to have him see. And that is its own level of power. And she is in almost every single, really, I'm not kidding, almost every single meeting. She is sitting, and you can see her in pictures of almost every public event that he does. She's on the side of the Oval Office, by the door, nearest to the exit to the colonnade. That is the role she plays, and that is the role I expect she will continue to.
Jonathan, I want to switch gears just a little bit and bring up the story that's come out of Houston. Man killed by federal agent in Houston was not the target of ICE search. Federal immigration agents who killed a man during a traffic stop in Houston on Tuesday had been searching for a different person, according to a Department of Homeland Security spokeswoman. I bring this up because this is the first shooting we know of since the brouhaha over the shooting of Alex Preddy, first Renee Good and then Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, which led to a lot of changes at DHS, a lot of changes in personnel, and a lot of changes in tactics, not as in your face. But I just wonder, do headlines like these cause the president, cause the administration to decide, what, maybe we should change course? Or do headlines like these not have any impact in the administration, and particularly Stephen Miller decide, what, we're going to keep moving forward on something that is disruptive, to say the least?
They definitely have an impact, but this story is a good reminder that actually, despite public perception, they haven't turned off the switch on the mass deportation, on their efforts to remove people from the interior of the country, that they're just doing it in a less theatrical way. That's really the only thing that's changed. Is before you had, Kristi Noem riding around on a horse with a camera crew, Greg Bovino with his big olive coat, which we have in the book a senior White House person called his SS coat. There's less of the performative stuff, but the deportation operation is still continuing. Look, there's a division of opinion within the administration, and this is something we get into in the book. I think it's important for people to understand. Renee Good gets killed. Alex Preddy gets killed. This is in January, and there's huge public outcry. A few days after Alex Preddy gets killed, the vice president walks into Susie Wiles's office for a senior staff meeting, and he says, we have to we should invoke the Insurrection Act, that we need to suppress these left-wing protesters. Says they're all paid activists. There's not any evidence that Renee Good or Alex Preddy were paid activists. But that's what he was saying. And so then a debate ensues. And one of the top lawyers in the White House, Will Scharf, says essentially that the conditions do not warrant such an extreme action as to send in troops into these. Stephen Miller, in a sort of fairly mild way for him, pushes back and said, well, we haven't really tested this authority. So it's very much a live debate, and it's sort of this loaded weapon that's still sitting on the shelf. But I think the thing that people need to understand is Trump is not necessarily there. He goes back and forth. So that's why you see this sort of gyrations, but the policy's still going.